Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoterica, another episode of the Unported playlist where we take a look at some of my favorite unported arcade games of all time. And today we're taking a look at Virtua Cop 3. And this is one I spent a lot of time playing in arcades and absolutely love it, even though it is a lot different than the first two Virtua Cop games. Before we get too far involved, if you could do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined, we got a Patreon link down there as well if you want to support the channel. But Virtua Cop 3 is one of those games, this was supposed to come home as a home port, because it's running on arcade hardware that is basically just an original Xbox in a box. The only difference is that Xbox arcade hardware has an additional 64 megabytes of RAM, giving it a total of 128 megabytes. Interestingly enough, you can upgrade some original Xboxes by soldering in a secondary 64 megabyte RAM chip. Not all motherboards are compatible, and you have to have the console fully modded first. I actually thought about showing you guys that on a technicality tutorial, but I realized one, it's a really intense project that not many people are really going to want to do, and two, it only allows you to play a few games that were available on the Xbox arcade-based hardware. And honestly, I'm using an Xbox emulator right now, CXBX, and it works so well. Honestly, doing all that soldering work and buying the parts just doesn't really seem worth it. So if you want to play Virtua Cop 3, highly recommend you just emulate it. But if you've ever played the first two Virtua Cop games, you definitely know what you're getting into. It's a light gun shooter, action-oriented, and they're all excellent games. Now, the first two Virtua Cops are definitely a lot more colorful and a lot more lighthearted than Virtua Cop 3, but it still holds the same gameplay, the same awesome light gun action, and the villains are pretty comical in their own right. But it's definitely a really amazing game, and it's so unfortunate that this didn't get ported home, because this was announced as an Xbox game, and supposedly, at least if you believe rumors on the internet, some stories, the reason this didn't actually come out on Xbox was that there was no light gun peripheral at that point in time, so they canceled it. Obviously, the Xbox did end up getting a light gun because you can play things like House of the Dead 3 on it, but that's the reality of the story. I do love these little intercuts here where you have so many seconds to shoot certain things, so good or bad things will happen. We were able to hit all three targets in the time frame that we had, and that gigantic chandelier fell and basically killed all the enemies, which is unfortunate because in real life I love chandeliers and really wouldn't shoot at one if I didn't have to, but that's a total aside. But if you like light gun arcade games, this is one that I highly recommend you check out. You can play this on Windows 10 with the emulator perfectly fine. If you have something like a Sinden light gun or otherwise, it works perfect for those as well. You can use a mouse, you can use an Xbox controller. It's a really easy game to deal with. Now, there is only one slight caveat or asterisk to that statement, and that's there's a slight graphical bit. Okay, let me try that again. There's a slight graphical glitch in the second stage that basically has you playing with a strange filter over it for about a minute. You can see enemies, you can shoot them, you can get through it perfectly fine, but it is one issue with the emulation that isn't going to occur if you're playing on an original modded Xbox. But honestly, just deal with that 1 minute versus soldering another RAM chip into your console. It's a very fine pitch to be able to solder that in, so it's going to be a project that I wouldn't recommend for beginners or new to intermediate level soldering. But I do love how there's this little intercut story. You get just enough story for an arcade game, which is to say not much, but it's fun, and it gives you a little bit of a break in the action. What I've always loved about Virtua Cop and Virtua Cop 2 is just the overall pacing of the game. It is action-packed, it is difficult, it has everything you want in a light gun shooter. And considering this was running on the original Xbox hardware, it still looks really good, and I love how interactable everything is. You can shoot each and every one of these bottles and beakers off the shelf. Some of them shatter, there's debris, there's particle effects. It looks really, really good. And like I said, it's unfortunate this didn't get ported home because this is definitely the type of game I would have gone out and buy day one. Because I originally bought an Xbox because I wanted to play the House of the Dead 3, and I bought it with a light gun. That's why I owned an original Xbox. And boss fights too, they're really good. They have multiple stages, different mechanics, different ways you have to play to be able to beat the boss. So you're going to get a lot of fun out of playing something like this. And it's unfortunate we haven't gotten a Virtua Cop 4. Of course, it's just another franchise that Sega seems to neglect now in lieu of Sonic games that aren't great. But now that we're moving on to the second mission, I like how each mission feels different too. You're going to see here we're now in a bank. It's bright daylight out. Everything's kind of a little bit different. And I do like the fact that the designers really thought about making each individual mission feel like it's its own unique thing. Of course, like any light gun game, you're definitely going to get civilians that pop up, and I hit them now and then. It does want to trick you out of your money, but the great thing about emulation, or if you use the original Xbox, is it's on free play. You're not spending any money. If you're playing this in arcades like I did back in the day, it was probably a $20 game to play to be able to see the ending, and I definitely probably spent more on it than I wanted to. So it's kind of a slightly cheap game if you're pumping quarters in, but when you're not, it doesn't really matter. And again, we get a little cutscene, and then we have another one of these, for lack of a better term, quick time events. Although it's not just a button press, you do have to be accurate at the same time. But we shoot all 3 of these grenades that are coming at us, and it is in the dark, and then all of a sudden, we're free and clear to move on. What I'll let you do is watch just the next little bit of segment, including some story, hear the sound effects, hear the music, they are quite good. I'll be back in about a minute, and we'll finish up with a little more Virtua Cop 3, and I'll try not to accidentally swear while I'm doing it. And the villain's head just disappears. That's what I mean when I say there's slight graphical glitches. It doesn't really affect anything in that moment in time, but it is pretty hilarious just to see a head completely missing from a body, and then magically it is back again. For some strange reason, that actually makes me like the game a little bit more via emulation. It just has those kind of strange and funny glitches, but you are going to notice some now and again. But they're always improving the original Xbox emulation, so it should be something that's solved relatively quickly. But if you do want to modify the hardware on your original Xbox One, I will leave a link in the description below on how to do it, because I probably will do it eventually so I can play this from my couch and just do a couple other fun mods on the original Xbox. But like I said, it just didn't seem like something that was worth showing you guys, because if you have the technical knowledge to be able to do it, you probably just have already done it if you're interested. But I can't recommend Virtua Cop 3 enough. I've always loved this franchise, and if you've been watching the channel, you know I 110% love pretty much any light gun shooter, including ones that aren't very good. But again, this is a cabinet that I just don't really see often whatsoever. I probably haven't seen one of these in maybe 10, 12 years. I don't know if it did well or not in arcades, but it's not something that's stood the test of time like something like House of the Dead, which pretty much is at every arcade imaginable. And it's unfortunate that if it didn't do well, we didn't go to Virtual Cop 4, because I feel like there's a really big market for these type of games in virtual reality. Some of my favorite virtual reality games have been light gun-esque shooters, whether it's on the original HTC Vive or the PSVR or the Oculus Rift. It's a really good genre for these type of games, and a lot of the most popular games, things like Superhot, in a way have almost been like light gun shooters. So hopefully at some point in time, Sega and other companies continue to recognize that these games make really good arcade experiences, and arcade experiences have been really fun to play in virtual reality, because even on PSVR, Until Dawn Rush of Blood being an on-rails light gun style shooter, I absolutely loved that game and could not play it enough, and I still, every once in a while, pick my PSVR up and play that game again just to get some more light gun shooting content. But like I said, your mileage may vary. Maybe this isn't your favorite genre, maybe you hate it completely. But it's got everything you want out of an arcade game. It's got great set pieces, the action and the pacing are excellent, the story, what's there, is good enough to be considered a story. But it just has that classic arcade feel that the original Virtual Cop and its sequel Virtual Cop 2 delivered. And it's the type of game, just like a shmup, you can get better at these. You can learn the patterns. All of the enemy patterns are consistent. A lot of the projectiles are consistent. So this is the type of game that the more you play, the better you get at it. So in that respect, I actually really like these type of arcade games, because unlike a beat 'em up, I mean, of course there's some skill and you can get better at it, I love how you can start to memorize these games. Now, the one thing I hate about Virtual Cop 3 is if you don't beat the game the right way, you don't get to see the fourth and final level. All of these projectiles coming down right now, if you miss a single one of them when you're shooting, you cannot get the good ending of the game unless you replay the entire thing from scratch. A little bit of a bummer. But if you have any questions, leave them down below. I love chatting with you guys. Otherwise, like I said earlier, if you could do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. We will be back next Sunday with an Unported arcade game, and then we'll have videos on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday as well. Short of that, if you've ever played Virtual Cop, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.
Reinforcements. Get out of there now.